Imagine a place where every corner tells a story, where every street was once forest, and every iconic skyscraper was once nothing but air. That's New York City, the most famous metropolis on Earth. And the story of how it became what it is today is far more incredible than you think, especially when you realize that almost everything we now associate with New York, the skyline, the culture, the sheer unstoppable energy, simply didn't exist just a century ago. And yet here it stands, a city of 8.3 million people spread across 32,000 streets, 5 boroughs, and 3 rivers, all rising from what was once untamed wilderness and becoming a symbol of ambition, resilience, and reinvention, unlike anything else on the planet. And it all started over 400 years ago, when long before the roar of traffic and rush of subway trains, the land was a peaceful stretch of dense forests and flowing rivers, home to Algonquian-speaking Native American tribes, most notably the Lenape, who lived harmoniously with the land for thousands of years, hunting, fishing, and cultivating without disturbance until, in 1524, an Italian explorer named Giovanni de Verri, sailing under the French flag, became the first European to lay eyes on the shores of what we now call New York Harbor, claiming it in the name of France, though his claim went unchallenged and unfulfilled for decades until 1609, when Henry Hudson, an Englishman working for the Dutch East India Company, sailed up the river that would later bear his name while searching for a mythical Northwest Passage, and instead found something far more real, a strategic trading hub surrounded by rich lands and navigable waters, which the Dutch quickly recognized as a valuable foothold in the New World and began to colonize, establishing trading posts along the Hudson River and beyond under the banner of New Netherland. But it wasn't until 1624 that they sent settlers to permanently occupy the region, landing first on Governor S. Island before constructing Fort Amsterdam on the southern tip of Manhattan in 1625. Marking the official birth of New Amsterdam, the small settlement that would one day become New York City, and just a year later in 1626, Peter Minuit famously purchased the entire island of Manhattan from the Lenape for a bundle of goods worth 60 guilders, about $1,000 in today's money, though the legitimacy of that transaction remains deeply questioned today. Still, the colony grew, albeit slowly, and by 1655 had around 1,500 inhabitants under the often unpopular rule of Peter Stuyvesant, whose strict policies on religion and commerce stirred unrest. But even that instability couldn't stop the momentum. Not even when England, locked in maritime rivalry with the Dutch, sent a fleet in 1664 that seized New Netherland without a shot fired, renaming both the colony and its capital New York in honor of the Duke of York, who would later become King James II, and although the Dutch briefer reclaimed the city in 1673, it was officially returned to English control a year later under the Treaty of Westminster. New York's identity as an English, and eventually American city, one that continued to flourish thanks to immigration, trade, and the brutal profits of slavery, which by the 1740s meant 1 in 5 residents was enslaved, even as New York also became a center of revolutionary thought, home to the Stamp Act, Congress in 1765, and the radical Sons of Liberty who challenged British rule and helped ignite the American Revolution, during which the city was occupied by the British, from 1776 until the end of the war in 1783, when they finally evacuated, leaving New York to become a beacon of liberty in the new nation, so much so that it briefly served as the U.S. Capitol, hosting George Washington's inauguration and the first sessions of Congress at Federal Hall in 1789. From there, New York exploded into a financial powerhouse, with Wall Street emerging as the nation's economic core. The founding of the New York Stock Exchange in 1792, and the opening of the Erie Canal in 1825, connecting the Great Lakes to the Atlantic via the Hudson River and making the city America's busiest port, setting off a wave of immigration so massive that the population jumped from 60,000 in 1800 to over 500,000 by 1850, fueled by people fleeing famine, war, and persecution in Europe and Asia, all arriving with hope in their hearts, only to face overcrowded tenements, rampant disease, and brutal poverty in neighborhoods like the Lower East Side, 5 Points, and Hell's Kitchen, where crime and corruption flourished and tensions exploded during the Civil War with the draft riots of 1863, a violent uprising sparked by anger over conscription policies that allowed the rich to buy their way out of service, while the poor were sent to die, one of the worst civil disturbances in American history. But even in this chaos, New York kept growing, evolving into a cultural mecca with the rise of Central Park, Broadway, Carnegie Hall, and major institutions like the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the New York Public Library, as well as newspapers like the New York Times that shaped public discourse and further cemented the city's status as the nation's intellectual and cultural heartbeat. And it didn't stop there. The Brooklyn Bridge opened in 1883, a stunning feat of engineering connecting Manhattan and Brooklyn, and in 1886 the Statue of Liberty was unveiled, a gift from France and a symbol of hope for the millions of immigrants arriving at Ellis Island. which opened in 1892, marking New York as the gateway to the American dream, a reputation that only intensified with the opening of the city's first subway line in 1904 and the rise of the Sky Line as the Chrysler Building, Woolworth Building, and Empire State Building pushed architectural limits in the early 20th century, reflecting the city's unshakable ambition, even as Prohibition-era speakeasies and jazz clubs lit up the nightlife. And yet, it wasn't all celebration, because the 1929 stock market crash plunged New York into the Great Depression, turning Central Park into a patchwork of makeshift Hoovervilles and leaving thousands jobless and desperate until World War II breathed new life into the economy, with factories and ports humming again in support of the Allied war effort. And after the war, while Europe and Asia lay in ruins, New York emerged as the undisputed global capital, home to the United Nations, the epicenter of modern art, and a rival to London's financial district. Even as the 1970s brought a surge in crime, bankruptcy, and urban decay that nearly broke the city, but once again, New York refused to collapse, revitalizing itself through waves of renewal, gentrification, and cultural reinvention. And by the late 20th and early 21st centuries, it stood tall once more, facing tragedy on 9/11s with heartbreak and resilience, then rebuilding again with the same relentless spirit that had driven it for centuries. And today, from the glitz of Times Square to the borough pride of Queens, from the legacy of Harlem to the rebirth of Lower Manhattan, New York City continues to embody something far greater than the sum of its parts, a place forged through conflict and compromise, shaped by diversity and adversity, and forever defined by the unbreakable idea that no matter how many times it gets knocked down, it will always find a way to rise again.